Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another virtual wine education presentation brought to you on behalf of the Pennsylvania Wine Society. Today, we will be discussing the Loire Valley. In French, it's, excuse my French, Jardin de la France. And our presenter today is returning. He's done presentations for us 2 or 3 times before. And his name is Kevin Ostrowski, a very extensively credentialed fellow who knows of what he speaks. And he will be discussing the entire length of the river that runs through the Loire, which means a lot of different places and a lot of different terroir. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Kevin. Oh, and I do have some housekeeping to bring up here. One thing is that today we will be recording, as we typically do, this session. And that your attendance will signify your approval of such. So if this would be a good time to leave if you don't want to be recorded. Otherwise, we'll get going with Kevin. So Kevin, please.
Very good. Thanks, Marty, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to another, let's see, prior to the snowmageddon that we're about to get in this part of the world. I guess a santé to you all, and I hope you enjoy your afternoon in the Loire Valley. This is a little bit about me. I'm not going to cover it extensively. Like I usually say, let's just say I've been busy since I retired in 2016. So I've taken an interest in wine and have pursued many things. These are my laundry list of what I enjoy doing. A little bit about the Loire Valley. First of all, going back to the indigenous peoples of the Loire Valley, these peoples would have been Celtic tribes living in the land which was referred to as Gaul. There's a photograph, or at least an artist's conception of what the ancient Gauls would have looked like. And the actual word Loire is derived from the Gaelic word liga, which means silt, sediment, or deposit, which kind of would make sense considering this is a very large river valley and very fertile at the same time. It would make for great settlement and the production of agricultural crops. In Latin, the word became liger. In French, here now comes the tie to the wine world. In French, the word would be lie or surly, as perhaps some wine people would recognize. In English, the lees. The lees, of course, is the dead yeast, which lays at the bottom of a wine vessel, which again would also refer to a sediment or a deposit at the bottom of a wine vessel. So the actual word Loire itself is derived from a Gaelic language and has since been translated into English to lees. The original Gaelic peoples would have probably mostly drank either beer or mead, as that would be their agricultural background. I mean, they would have grain available as well as honey to ferment. So that would have been the beverage of choice, of course, until the Roman occupation, which occurs in the 1st century BCE. And the Romans brought with them their wine rations, which the Roman soldiers would have called pasca. Now, pasca would have been a wine diluted with either vinegar and herbs and maybe salt. You can only imagine what it must have tasted like if they had to dilute it with those particular products. But the Gaelic Wars, again, initiated by Julius Caesar in the 1st century, would have then caused an occupation of the Loire Valley with the Romans and the development of viticulture. As you all know, we've talked about it before, viticulture was actually brought or had been learned by the Romans from the ancient Greeks and the Phoenicians. So the Romans were just bringing with them that which they knew, and their beverage of choice would have been wine. So overall, the Loire Valley became the wine growing region of the northern part of Gaul, which today is, of course, northern France. Again, 1st century BCE, Julius Caesar occupies the Loire Valley and the northern regions of Gaul. The area is later developed by Caesar Augustus in the 1st century in the Common Era. With the Romans, they bring with them Christianity, and the first bishops of the area, Saint Gatien and Saint Martin of Tours, would have, of course, had a strong foothold in the Loire Valley. Of course, with Roman Catholicism comes the use of sacramental wine and the planting of more vineyards. In the 6th century, King Clovis unifies France and begins to construct fortifications along the Loire Valley. These fortifications and forts give the people safe haven when they are attacked by other Celtic tribes from the north or from the south. In the 12th century, Eleanor of Aquitaine, the Countess of France, the wife of King Louis VII, annuls the marriage, marries the Duke of Normandy of England, Henry II, and I think this lady's story would probably make a great movie, considering she was the Queen of France, and after marrying Henry became the Queen of England, and becomes a member of the Plantagenet family. But anyway, Eleanor's tie with England means that a lot of the wine from the Loire Valley makes its way to England and has become one of the bigger export products of the Loire Valley. With the 15th century and the 100 Years' War, we end up with, again, Joan of Arc being a notable character in the area of Tours. Joan, of course, joins the army and helps the king at the time, Charles VII, eliminate the siege of the city of Orleans. And that's a big French victory at the time. The 16th century brings on the Renaissance. The king invites Leonardo da Vinci to the area. He takes up residence in Amboise, and the fortresses then get converted into the castles as the noblemen begin to realize that this is a great place to spend their spring and summer seasons. So the various Loire Valley becomes a kind of the vacation spot for the nobility. Here are some of the chateaus. Again, these were former fortresses. These were some of the most famous chateaus in the Loire Valley region. I wanted to highlight one, the Chateau de Chenonceau. That one was the one on the title slide. This one ultimately is taken over by the wife of the king, Catherine de' Medici. You may recognize the Medici name out of the powerful family in Venice. And today, the Chateau de Chenonceau is still open to the public. I'm sure COVID has changed some of those tourist rules, but the actual castle is owned by the Meunier, the big chocolate name in France, which is now a subdivision of the Nestle company. So this particular Chateau de Chenonceau was, again, occupied by Catherine de' Medici, today owned by the Nestle company and the French chocolate company Meunier. The reason for the fireworks there is because after the occupation by Catherine de' Medici, she's known to have thrown lavish parties in the chateau, and this was one of the first times when fireworks were fired in France as part of her party. So it must have been a good time back in the day with Catherine de' Medici at the Chateau de Chenonceau. I have a little 3-minute video that I thought would be fun to watch, even though it's kind of a wine-centered presentation. I thought that this little 3-minute video would give you an idea as to the inside of one of these chateaus. And this comes to us by way of Rick Steves. And if you're familiar with Rick, again, I think just a short 3-minute video.
The pastoral Loire Valley hides countless castles or chateaux. While you'll likely visit several, it's important to choose wisely. Rather than seeing a string of similar palaces, we've lined up a variety, several distinctly different chateaux. While Chambord was grandiose, our next one is graceful. The Chateau of Chenonceau is the toast of the Loire. This 16th century Renaissance palace arches gracefully over the Cher River. Its formal garden, combined with the delightful riverside setting, makes it one of the great sights in all of Europe. The palace is lovingly maintained, with bouquets of fresh flowers adding fragrance and an included audio guide, making sure visitors understand what they're looking at. Big fireplaces warmed big beds, while portraits of illustrious owners give the place a certain pedigree. While the tapestries kept the rooms cozy, they also functioned to depict recent history, to the king's liking, of course. These 16th century tapestries are among the finest in France. Chenonceau was the first great pleasure palace. With its ravishing grand gallery spanning the river, it was designed for high society. Nicknamed the Chateau of the Ladies, Chenonceau housed many famous women over the centuries. In 1547, King Henry II gave the original castle to his mistress, Diane de Poitiers. She added an arched bridge over the river. When the king died, his wife, the queen, Catherine de' Medici, took over the chateau. She threw out the mistress, turned Diane's bridge into a fancy ballroom, and according to legend, put her own portrait above the fireplace in her rival's bedroom. Big personalities like kings tickled more than one tiara at a time. Mistresses were a routine part of the mix. Louis XV.
Kevin, I think we have some problem with the, nobody's getting the video. They're only getting the audio.
Oh, okay. Rather than, I mean, I can try playing it again, Marty, but I think I'll just forego it.
Yeah, let's just move on.
Yeah, I think I want to just move on. I guess the bottom line is I just wanted to, let everyone hear or maybe see a little bit of the inside. You can certainly go on Rick Steves' website and see this particular video on your own. Again, it's just a fabulous place, a lovely place. I would certainly love to visit the chateau one day. The Loire Valley has several chateaus. They have been, at least a good portion of them have been identified as a World Heritage Sites. The area between Souilly, Sur-Loire, and the Chalon region is again where most of these chateaux are located. Again, is a United Nations World Heritage Site. If you do visit the area, it is possible to spend the night in one of these chateaux, as many of the chateau owners, in order to maintain the property, they get funded by the government if they open up the chateaus to the public, and many of them have turned them into bed and breakfast hotels. So I think that would be a pretty neat adventure to stay in one of the chateaus in the Loire Valley. On the lower left-hand corner there, I highlighted this in one of my previous presentations, but on HGTV, there was an actual reconstruction, or at least a renovation of an old chateau in the Loire Valley. The name of the show was Escape to the Chateau, and it's about an English couple that takes over the chateau and refurbishes it, turns it into a wedding and bed and breakfast venue. Again, a pretty fascinating show to see the workings or the inner construction of the chateau. Again, as Marty mentioned, the Loire Valley is known as the Jardin de la France, and this is some of the agricultural products that the Loire Valley is known for. Probably everyone's heard of d'Anjou pears, apples, cherries, of course, grapes, strawberries. Specifically, white asparagus becomes popular in this part of the world, as is currants and saffron. So that's a little bit of the product that can be found coming out of the Loire Valley. The Loire River is the longest river in France, so almost 630 miles. It's typically referred to as the cradle of the French, or as has been mentioned, Jardin de la France, the Garden of France. Interestingly enough, this is one of the only free-flowing rivers in France, in that the Loire Valley has never been dammed up at any one point. So to this day, it flows freely from central France all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. A little bit about the geography. Again, it is, the Loire River is really part of the north central portion of France. The latitude of the Loire River is 47 degrees north, which is about the same as the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And there, the map kind of gives you an idea as to how far north it is, to give you an idea of how, what the weather might be like and how cold it might be up in the Loire Valley. With its northerly latitude, it is of course cooler. But as you move inland toward the east, you get more maritime, a little less maritime, and a little more continental climates. So on the coast, Nantes, near the ocean, you get a cool maritime climate with warm summers, cool winters, and high humidity. But as you move east, that maritime influence decreases. You get a little bit more sun, some higher humidity, which encourages the growth of the botrytis, which is, again, we call the noble rot in the wine world, until you get into the continental climate of the central Loire and the eastern part of the upper Loire. I thought this map from the wines of Loire Valley was interesting. It kind of shows you how the climate changes as you move away from the coast and towards the center of the country. So you get the ocean climate near, of course, on the Atlantic, semi-oceanic in the middle, and then the continental climate far to the east. Here is a graphic of the Loire River. Now, this I thought was interesting because it shows you how the Loire River originates in the central portion of France, known in the mountainous region of the Massif Central. The Loire River begins its journey to the Atlantic Ocean and then passes through the Massif Armoricain, which is there on the coast. The region in between, known as the Paris Basin, again, a slight depression in the land, again, is where most of the sedimentary soils are located. On the right-hand side is a graphic showing you where the Loire River is relative to all the other rivers in France. This, I thought, again, I put this map together kind of showing you a very topographic view of the Loire River, again, flanked by the Alps and the Pyrenees to the south. The Loire River begins its journey in the Massif Central, the mountainous region in the southeastern side of France, across the Paris Basin, and then over to the Atlantic Ocean by way of the Massif Armoricain. Incidentally, for those of you that are familiar with it, you can clearly see where the Rhone Valley cuts through the Massif Central and the Alps, right there in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. One of the more common soils in the Paris Basin region of the Loire Valley, and a very notable soil, is this soil called tuffeau. Tuffeau is a limestone found in the Loire Valley, made up of chalk, sand, very fine grained sedimentary soil. It is leftover remnants of the seafloor with a very porous stone and a very low density. On the right-hand side, this is the stone that made up the construction of the famous chateaus, such as Chateau de Chambord. You can see some of the walls of the chateau there having been constructed out of the tuffeau stone. And also ancient Neanderthals in prehistory would have carved caves or used the caves in the hillsides to make their homes. Today, we call these cavemen troglodytes. And again, if you're interested in sleeping in one, many of these caves have been converted into hotels and bed and breakfasts. And there's a very La Vignole hotel in the lower left-hand corner where they've actually transposed or transferred some of these caves into a sleeping quarters. So I just thought it would be pretty interesting if you visited the area to stay in some of these tuffeau caves. Some climatic events that kind of shaped the wine world in the Loire Valley. In 1709, we have what is now referred to as Le Grand Hiver, which is the Great Winter. This occurred in January of 1709. It lasted for 3 months. This was the coldest winter on record from the previous 500 years. They actually put the war between England and France on hold. It was just too cold to wage any war. Again, the stories that are documented include ice skating on the canals of Venice and also riding by horseback between Sweden and Norway and Denmark because the bays and the rivers would have been frozen. Many thousands of people perished in the cold weather, church bells broke, and the wine froze in the bottles. The reason why this is important in the wine world is because the king at the time, Louis XIV, mandated that after this winter had completed its cycle, that only the grape Melon de Bourgogne would have been planted in the Loire Valley, primarily because this was the only grape that was able to survive the extreme cold. And as a result, without having lost all the other vineyards, this grape hopefully would have survived any future cold weather events. Later in the 19th century, in the late 1800s, we have the introduction of phylloxera to the Loire Valley. Phylloxera, again, is a root louse, a member of, again, it's a lice that attacks the roots of the grapevines. This louse is actually native to North America, and it is believed that cuttings that were transported to Europe in the 1850s brought the phylloxera louse to Europe. The louse ended up devastating almost between 75 and 90% of the vines in Europe, especially in France. In the lower left-hand corner, there's an image there. It's showing you the results of what the phylloxera louse is doing to the grapevines. You can see what looks like a lush grapevine vineyard land, but everywhere where the phylloxera louse is attacking the roots, the vines are starting to turn brown as their roots are now dying. It takes a US botanist by the name of Charles Valentine Riley out of Illinois, actually British born, now living in Illinois, who observes that the American rootstocks, grapes like Lambrusca, Riparia, Rupstrus, and Astavillus, are actually phylloxera resistant. Charles works with a Frenchman by the name of Jules Émile Planchon, and Charles and Jules determined that if we graft the American rootstock to the vinifera grapes of France, we can perhaps create a grapevine that is resistant to phylloxera. Thomas Volney Munson out of Texas supplies Charles and Jules with several different rootstocks from the Riparia, Rupstrus, and Astavillus grapes. And there in the center, you can see how the roots of these native grapes are grafted onto the vinifera grapes and eventually save all of the European vineyards as a result. So there's two Americans and a Frenchman that is basically credited with saving the European wine trade.
Of course, it's a problem that was brought on by the American grapes in the first place, right?
That's exactly right. And it just so happens we had the solution to that problem as well. How convenient was that? I threw this in because I think this is also interesting. Again, with the introduction of phylloxera, there was also other efforts trying to determine different ways of finding phylloxera-resistant vines. It's around this time that we see the emergence of hybrid grapes as well as vinifera crosses. Now, a hybrid grape is a cross between two different grape species, one Vitis vinifera, and the other one could be any one of the three that I previously mentioned. And I listed there some examples of three different hybrid grapes that you may have heard of before. Baco Noir, Vidal Blanc, and Norton are three examples of these hybrids, which came from different species of grapes that were crossbred. Now, a true cross, which is the same genus and species, would be two Vitis vinifera grapes that are being crossed to produce yet a third new grape. Some common examples would be Pinotage, which is popular in South Africa, as well as Petite Syrah, which is taking hold in many parts of Europe and the United States. But there you can see their parent grapes, an example being Pinotage, Pinot Noir, and Cinsault, both vinifera, creating yet a third variety of grapes. It's after phylloxera that the Loire Valley begins to plant the four signature grapes of that particular part of the world: Melon de Bourgogne, Cabernet Franc, Chenin Blanc, and Sauvignon Blanc. So after phylloxera devastates the vineyards, those are the four main grapes that are planted. Again, they would have all been planted on American rootstock and then taken hold in the Loire Valley. Before we get into the wines of the region, I wanted to cover a little bit about some French wine law. In 1935, the Institut National des Appellations d'Origine et de la Qualité, the INAO, established a system whereby the quality of the wine and the labeling on the wine would have been controlled. So today, if you find a bottle of wine that's labeled as Vin de Table or Vin de France, that is generally a lower quality, or what's seen as a lower quality wine. Vin de France would have been a wine made with 100% French-grown grapes, but anywhere from the country of France. IGP, Indication Géographique Protégée, or country wine, Vin de Paille, would be a simple wine where 85% of the grapes are from the region stated on the bottle of wine. This IGP wine accounts for about 1/3 of all French wine. All the wines that I'm going to mention today will be AOC wines, Appellation d'origine contrôlée, or AOC or AC wines. In the European Union rules, that would be AOP. And these wines are what we're going to be talking about primarily today. AOC wines out of the Loire Valley. These are the more common wines, again, in the Loire Valley. I'm sorry about that. The Loire Valley wines are, again, are mostly white wines. They produce more white wine than any other French region. They're second to Champagne only in the sparkling wine production. Their signature whites, their superstar grapes, are Melon de Bourgogne, Chenin Blanc, and Sauvignon Blanc, and their classic red is Cabernet Franc, which is also known as Breton in the Loire Valley. Now, you may recognize Chenin Blanc. That was the cuttings of Chenin Blanc that were taken by Jan van Riebeeck during his travels on the spice trade as part of the Dutch East India country, and he made South Africa his port city, which then became the plantings of Chenin Blanc, so famous in South Africa. I like this map because it kind of shows you where the grapes of the Loire Valley are planted. On the coast, you get primarily Melon de Bourgogne. In the central portion of the Loire Valley, you get Cab Franc and Chenin Blanc. And in the far eastern side, Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Noir. Now, those are not the only varieties that are grown. There's other grapes that are mentioned. But again, these are the superstars, or the four at the top of the page. I did want to highlight that in this part right here, Côte is one of the grapes that's grown in the Loire Valley. That's another name for the Malbec grape. So Côte and Malbec are actually the same grape. I'm not going to cover these in great detail. I just wanted to, again, highlight the Loire Valley. There's 51 regions, wine growing regions in the Loire Valley, which represents 14% of all the French wine growing regions. And as you can see from the bottom graph, primarily the most popular kind of wine coming out of the Loire Valley is whites, with almost half of all the wines out of the Loire Valley being white wines of some sort. Rosés take a close second at about 25%. Of those wines, Cabernet d'Anjou, a rosé wine out of the Anjou region, is again the most popular. And Cabernet Franc, of course, would make up the bulk of that Cabernet d'Anjou, and that accounts for most of the plantings. Let's get into the individual wine regions. The first wine region closest to the Atlantic Ocean is Pays Nantais. Now, the word Pays translates from the French meaning country. So this means the Nantais country, and this is the first wine region closest to the Atlantic Ocean we'll talk about. First of all, this particular region enjoys a maritime climate, meaning that it has mild autumns, a mild winter, but a very hot and humid summer. Think about, say, Michigan in the heat of the summer, pretty hot, being close to the ocean. The soils of the Nantais region would be those soils that are predominant in that large mountainous region known as the Massif Armoricain. This is igneous rocks, metamorphic, nice mica, schist, greenstone, and granite, anywhere from sea level and above to about 170 feet above sea level. just for references, I did look up the elevation of Harrisburg is about 322 feet above sea level. So this particular region only is about half as high in elevation as that of the city of Harrisburg. And of course, being close to the ocean, this is primarily coastal and woodland landscape. 75% of the wines from this region are coming from the grape Melon de Bourgogne. And in the different styles, this is a very neutral wine, very high in acid. They age the wine on the lees for extended periods of time, primarily to allow the yeast to degrade and decompose, giving the wine a very soft and creamy mouthfeel. Some of these wines may have a slight sparkle to them, as the fermentation may or may not be 100% complete when the wine is bottled.
Just to point out, the Melon de Bourgogne grape is made into a wine called Muscadet.
That's exactly right. And we'll get to some examples here momentarily, but Muscadet is the wine that comes from the Melon de Bourgogne grape.
Between the two of us, Kevin, we're both from Western PA, and boy, I'll tell you, our French, you can tell our Pittsburgh accents.
It's as good as it gets, Marty. It's as good as it gets.
I'm telling you.
Yep. There's some climatic data for the area. You can see I put in parentheses there the comparison to Pennsylvania in general, and you can see, other than the amount of rain, we're fairly close to the climate in this Pie Nantais region. Incidentally, I just thought it was interesting that this particular area is the original home of Jules Verne, author of Around the World in 80 Days and also 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So Jules came from this part of the world. The wine growing regions in this Nantais region include Muscadet, Coteaux de Loire, Coteaux de Grandlieu, Muscadet Savetmont, Coteaux d'Ancis, Muscadet. And three of those regions with the word Muscadet in their titles are authorized by the INAO to produce Muscadet only. In other words, they only grow and make wine out of that Melon de Bourgogne grape. Also, I thought it would be interesting because of the white wine here. Beurre Blanc was actually created in this part of the world. Beurre Blanc being a simple white sauce made with shallots and wine and butter. But that Beurre Blanc would have been created in the late 19th century in the area of Nantes. And one of the classic pairings for Muscadet wine is oysters, which would also make sense considering the proximity to the Atlantic Ocean. So when it looks for some food pairings, look for anything with fish and Beurre Blanc and maybe oysters as a good pairing for Muscadet wine. Now, I don't know if anyone happens to have any Muscadet wines. However, I thought I found some examples in the PLCB system. Here is one, the Chateau Boissonnière de la Ramée. This is from Chiraud Car, and this is a Melon de Bourgogne. You can see, as I mentioned, it's 100% Muscadet Melon de Bourgogne grape. They did allow this wine to sit for 6 to 9 months on the lees, on the yeast sediment. This particular wine was made in concrete vats. And as a result, again, a very delicious wine, again, to pair with some of those nice fish dishes and Beurre Blanc. This is the wine that I happen to be drinking right now. This is a Muscadet Savetmont. It is coming from the Chateau Delaunay. It is a 100% Melon de Bourgogne with a 13% alcohol. This was actually made in glass-lined, I guess you can't see the wine very well. There, that's better. Glass-lined concrete, 8 to 12 months on the lees. And batonnage is the process where the winemaker would actually stir the yeast sediment with the wine in its container over the winter in order to mix up some of that yeast sediment into the wine. So they would have mixed the wine with the yeast for 2 to 3 different times over the winter. Again, just some tasting notes on this wine. My tasting notes gave it a little nose of a little bit of pineapple, some lemon lime peel, a little bit of phenolic bitterness, almost like underripe grapes. A lot of minerality, but a very creamy mouthfeel, very soft in the mouth. Again, it really reminds me of being like soft and creamy would be the words I would use to describe it. But again, that comes with that extra length of time sitting on its lees. Just curious, Marty, I'm not looking at the chat. Does anyone else happen to have a Muscadet wine that they might be drinking this evening or this afternoon?
So far, nobody's commented. Let me see. Somebody was asking if it's on the sweet side. Not necessarily.
No, this particular Muscadet is, at least the one I'm drinking, is a very dry version. And most of them I've had have been dry. I'm sure you can find sweeter versions, but most of them are going to be fermented dry.
Gary Slobodian has commented that they are drinking Muscadet over at his house.
Good, excellent. Gary, I hope you're enjoying the Muscadet. And again, I don't know if you have similar tasting notes as I do, but I would guess they would be fairly similar in their descriptions. This I know Averill is, who's online, is also a very popular fan of Domaine de l'Écu. This is a Muscadet as well, 100% Melon de Bourgogne. They also use concrete vessels to age the wine, and they are 100% certified biodynamic.
They were one of the earliest biodynamic wineries in France, actually, and certainly in Muscadet. I've actually visited it almost by mistake. Well, I read about it, but didn't think we'd ever find it. We did, and it was extremely interesting.
Very good.
The other thing he does is he names his wines after rocks, which was, as a geologist, that was very appealing to me. So one of them is granite, one of them is gneiss, G-N-E-I-S-S, and orthoneiss, 3 different rocks that appear in the area. But they're beautiful wines, really beautiful. Yeah.
Yep, beautiful, nice. Again, Muscadet is going to have very similar characteristics. I did think it would be fun to at least mention what does it take to be called biodynamic. And this particular process, or at least wine growing procedure, was established or at least developed in 1924 by a gentleman by the name of Rudolf Steiner. They organized in 1927, and certification then began shortly thereafter. There is a European Demeter organization. There's also a United States version of the Demeter organization, and they need to be certified annually in order to continue to be called biodynamic. The farm is considered, on a biodynamic farm, the farm is considered a holistic organism, meaning that everything is looked at as working together. Some of the more notable characteristics, or the things that the biodynamic vineyards do, is to develop what they call preparations. This is basically, I guess in gardening language, this would be more like a compost tea, where they mix water and manure and other natural products, and then disperse these products in the vineyard. Another thing that they do commonly is to pack cow horns with manure and then bury them in the vineyards for a certain period of time. They also have, they harvest and prune and take care of their vineyards in accordance with things like the phases of the moon, the constellations, and the planets that happen to be in the sky at the time. So it's a fairly complex thing to be able to be, say, you're certified biodynamic, and not exactly easy, considering that there is, again, no use of artificial or other chemicals in the vineyard. The Demeter, again, the name itself derives its name from the Greek goddess of the harvest and the agriculture. So there is the goddess Demeter, again, developed by Rudolf Steiner back in the early 20s. Moving a little bit to the east, we get to the next region, Anjou-Saumur. This is now considered to be the central Loire Valley. Again, the climate changes a little bit where you get some continental influence, a little bit of maritime influence, mild winters, hot summers, but now we get lots of sunshine. You can see the elevation is a little bit higher than the Nantes region, being closer to that of Harrisburg, 262 feet above sea level. And again, if you look at the climatic data, other than the rainfall, you can see it's very similar to that of Pennsylvania. Again, here is the region where again, I just highlighted a couple of the culinary features of the area. Mushrooms become a big part of this area. As I mentioned, some of those Neanderthal troglodyte caves are located in this area. Mushroom growing becomes popular. And another dish famous in the Anjou-Saumur region is this riode d'Anjou, which is basically fried roasted pork bellies. They are pickled first and then roasted. And then I guess they would make a very nice accompaniment. I can't say I've ever had it before. It looks interesting, but I guess you have to be a fan of pork belly in the process. Here's a photograph of the region. The soils in this particular region take on a little bit of the Armoricaine, the slate, the schist, and the sandstone that we talked about previously. But now we start to see we're entering that Paris Basin region, and we're seeing some of that limestone known as tuffeau as part of this wine growing region. So the soils are starting to change as we move from west to east in the Loire Valley. The signature grapes of this particular region, red grapes, Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, and also a little bit of Gamay. And in the white, you get Chenin Blanc being one of the primary whites, made in all different styles, including sweet, but also sparkling, and just a slight sparkling called a petulant wine, which is, again, just got a little bit of fizziness to it. Incidentally, if you go to the Italians call a full sparkling wine spumante, and a light sparkle a frizzante. In French, mousseau and pétillant would be their language. This is where we see that sparkling wine called Cremant de Loire. Now, I remember that Joe talked about Cremant in his presentation on Champagne. A Cremant is a sparkling wine made the same way as Champagne is made. However, it's not made in the Champagne region. So Cremant de Loire would be a Champagne style made in the Loire Valley. This would be made in the traditional method, and those are the different grapes that would have been used to make the Cremant. There's all the different wine AOCs in the Anjou-Saumur region. At least that's the one I found in the PLCB system. Here are the three different rosés that are popular in this part of the world. The Rosé d'Anjou, the Rosé de Loire, and the Cabernet d'Anjou. Incidentally, you can notice, I'm not going to cover these in great detail, but the grapes are different for each of these different styles. You get Cab Franc, Gamay, and Malbec for the Rosé d'Anjou. You get the addition of Gamay and Pinot d'Aunis and Groliot in the Rosé de Loire, and Cab Franc for the Cabernet d'Anjou. What makes them, each one of them, different is the level of sweetness. The Rosé d'Anjou being a medium sweet, the Rosé de Loire being always a dry wine, and the Cabernet d'Anjou being an off-dry or slightly sweet wine. This is the one I found, and I have actually had as part of, in my tasting anyway, from the PLCB system. And again, just a hint of sweetness makes it a very, very pleasant wine to go with so many different dishes. Pork, even beef, although with a little bit of sweetness, I think it really goes well with ham and pork more so than anything else. Famous label, Barton and Goustier Rosé d'Anjou. Again, I'm not going to cover this in great detail, but Barton was an Irishman that began to export Bordeaux wine. Goustier, a Frenchman, partnered with his grandson to create the label and the company. This is one of their products, Rosé d'Anjou, Groliot, Gamay. To make it a rosé wine, they let it soak on the grape skins for just a short period of time. They cool the wine quickly to stop the fermentation, and we get a little bit of sweetness in this Rosé d'Anjou, about 7 grams per liter. Now, just for reference, we as human beings can taste sweetness at about the 1 to 2 grams per liter. So the 7 grams per liter would clearly be a perceptible sweetness for us. But there's the Barton and Goustier version of the Rosé d'Anjou. I'll also give them credit. They have wine growing vineyards all over France. And I've listed some of the other places where you can get Barton and Goustier labels: Saint-Emilion, Margaux, and Sauternes out of Bordeaux. Of course, Muscadet in the Loire Valley, Vouvray, also the Bordeaux Valley, and Burgundy and Beaujolais. Again, just a pretty popular label in the area. Savennières is another region, wine growing region in this area. Again, 100% Chenin Blanc coming from the Savennières region. Interesting that in 1996, Jacqueline Frederick called Savennières the most cerebral wine in the world in her book, Wine and Food, A Guide to the Loire Valley. And to this day, Savennières carries this particular moniker as being the most cerebral wine in the world. It's very austere wine. It becomes more like honey as it ages. Very high acid, full bodied, but also, again, a touch of sweetness, up to 8 grams per liter, although many times you do find it in its dry form. So there's a Savennières also coming from this particular region. The last wine I'm going to highlight from this area is coming from the region in between the different rivers. You can see in the red circle there, the area known as Carte de Chaume, and also Coteau du Léon and Bonnezeau are very notable for very sweet wines that are made from grapes affected by Botrytis cinerea, or the gray mold. There's a picture in your upper right-hand corner of some of these grapes that have been attacked by this particular mold. And there's a microscopic version of what the mold looks like. But what botrytis does is essentially dehydrates the grapes and turns them into raisins, concentrating the sugar within the grapes. Once those grapes are hand-picked and pressed, you get a very thick sugar syrup kind of juice, which is then fermented into wine, resulting in a wine that is very high in sugar. This Carte de Chaume, as you can see, at least the example I have on the left-hand side of the page, is a wine with 34 grams per liter residual sugar, which to us is going to be very, very sweet in its flavors. Botrytis would have been a characteristic. Botrytis gives these white wines a more honey-like aroma and flavor, very noticeable in the Sauternes of Bordeaux, but at the same time, this is in the Loire Valley, a little bit further north. An interesting pairing, I think, if you're going to have a Carte de Chaume, Stephanie and Caroline Tatin, who ran the Hotel Tatin back in the 19th century, developed this dessert with apples called a tarte tartine, which is basically an apple upside down cake in its form. But I think this would be an outstanding pairing. Carte de Chaume, a very sweet wine to go with a nice sweet dessert, would be a beautiful, beautiful pairing. And it would be originating from this part of the world as well. A tarte tatin with a Carte de Chaume. Just as an interesting backstory, the word carte means four, as you know, in France. And back in the Middle Ages, if a peasant wanted to perhaps develop some land that was not being farmed, he could approach his nobleman and ask the nobleman if he might be able to grow some crops on land that was currently not in use. If the nobleman agreed, they would then ask the peasant to give them 1/4 or 1/4 of the production from those fields, thus the development of the word carte. So Carte de Chaume was most likely in history developed from a peasant who had worked the land and gave 1/4 of his production to his nobleman at the time. But a carte de chaume is going to be a very sweet wine affected by the botrytis mold. Moving on to Touraine. Touraine, again, we're moving from east to west. The next region over is the land of Touraine. A little bit about the climate. We're starting to lose the ocean's influence and become a little bit more continental as we move eastward. The soils are clearly more tuffeau, that limestone of the Paris Basin, a little bit of sand and clay mixed in, pebbles and rocks on the high terraces above the rivers. And you can see the average elevation a little bit higher than Harrisburg at 380. Again, Harrisburg was around 322. So we're clearly higher in elevation. And as you also might guess, the river's kind of flowing downhill towards the Atlantic Ocean. Again, other than the rainfall, very similar in climate to that of Pennsylvania. One of the classic dishes, or at least one of the side dishes in this region, is called a VWE, which is essentially a French pita bread. It's a light, airy, puffy bread made with wheat, perhaps with other grains, but that would certainly be served along with some of these French side dishes. The area of Touraine. Here's one of the notes, I just like a little side trip. I thought one of the interesting chateaus located near the city of Tours in this part of the world is a very famous chateau, Villandry, which is near the city of Tours, and it is most famous for its gardens. The original gardens would have been, of course, very practical in nature, growing mostly vegetables for consumption. But as the Renaissance takes over, we get more elaborate plantings of flowers and more very organized, structured plantings, as we see in Italy. And we get these very elaborate gardens. Villandry is very notable for its gardens. And supposedly it was built near the site where King Philip of France and Richard the Lionhearted came to terms and established a peace between the two countries. I need a little bit of muscadet here. So there is Villandry. If you get a chance to visit, it would be the gardener's dream to visit this chateau. Here are the AOCs, the different wine growing regions of Touraine. We'll mention quite a few of them. Also notable is this Chateau d'Amboise, which is housing the remains of Leonardo da Vinci. Back in 1516, the King of France invited Leonardo as part of the Renaissance to come work for him. Leonardo took him up on the offer. Unfortunately, Leonardo only lasted about 3 more years before he passed away. They think it might have been a stroke that he died from. But Leonardo's remains were buried in the chapel of Saint-Hubert, and that's where he lies to this day. But there's all the wine growing regions of Touraine. If you happen to be in the area, go visit Leonardo, see how he's doing. This is one of the more popular wines. Again, a Barton and Goustier. You've heard those names before. VWE is 100% Chenin Blanc. In the Loire Valley, this grape is also known as Pinot de Loire. It's made in both dry and sweet styles. It's made in the still and sparkling styles. A common phrase in the wine world is hooray for VWE, because it makes so many different wines and so many different styles. There's a couple of different vineyards there. It's also made in a sparkling style. I found one example in the PLCB system, made in the traditional method. Again, this would be a sparkling VWE, most likely another Cremant. And I also wanted to highlight that it was believed that Saint Martin of Tours, and that's his cathedral there, it was the saint who brought the Chenin Blanc grape to this particular part of the world. So again, a little bit of legend associated with Saint Martin of Tours, and his feast day is still celebrated with big parties there because of his link to the wine world. Chinon is the other famous wine coming out of the Touraine region. Chinon, the Chateau of Chinon, is where Saint Joan of Arc met with Charles VII, asking him if she could participate in the war for France against the siege of the city of Orleans. Of course, Charles certainly gave her permission to do so, and we know the rest of the history of St. Joan of Arc becoming victorious for France. However, Chinon is known for being a wine made out of 100% Cabernet Franc. This particular version in the PLCB system was stainless steel fermented, and it has 9 months of bottle aging. Most likely, again, it's not going to contain any of those oaky flavors, but based on its cooler climate, you're going to find out that one of the characteristics of Chinon is a little bit of that green pepper aroma and flavor, which comes from the pyrazines, which are developed in the cooler climates with Cabernet Franc. These wines are fuller bodied. Again, they're not tremendously full bodied, not like a big California cab, but they are fruity, acidic, remnants of pencil lead, and as I mentioned, a little bit of that pyrazine aroma and flavor. In the Loire Valley, the Cabernet Franc grape would also be referred to as Breton, as the local name for Cab Franc. This particular wine, this is the wine I actually have in my glass here this afternoon. This is a Le Grand Boucateau. I did not find this in the PLCB system. I found it at a local wine shop here. Actually, I went over to Ohio and found a little independent wine shop there where I picked up this nice little wine. It's 100% Cab Franc, a Chinon, 14% alcohol by volume. My tasting notes give it a little bit of, red fruit character, some red raspberries, some red currants, a little bit of that green bell pepper aroma, but otherwise medium tannins, a very nice wine for drinking. And again, we're going to pair it this evening with some roasted beef, and I think it's going to be a great pairing for us. The last Chinon I'll mention is coming out of La Petite Roche, which in French is translated to Little Rocks. This came from the PLCB system, 35-year-old, maybe not old vines, but pretty old vines. This one will have a little bit more oak influence with 15 to 12 months in oak. And it would have also gone through malolactic fermentation, where the malic green apple acid is converted into lactic acid, making it a very, very soft and pleasant wine. So there's some examples of Chinon and Cabernet Franc. Our last area today is the Central Loire, also known as the Upper Loire or the Sainte Loire. This is on the far east side of the Loire River Valley. The climate in this particular part of the world is continental. We here in Pennsylvania enjoy a continental climate. We have mostly hot summers, we have cold winters, and again, spring and fall, the shoulder seasons are quite pleasant. The soils here are the famous Kimmeridgian limestone, which again comes from the Kimmeridge, southern part of England, all the way into France, a little bit of flint and some gravel. In this part of the world, they classify these soils into 3 different categories. There's the terre blanche, which is chalk and clay mixture, the silex, which is flint and sand mixture, a little bit of clay, limestone, and silica mixed in, and then lastly, a caillotte, which is gravel and limestone mixtures. So depending on where you're at, again, your elevation and what part of the river valley you're in, you might run into any one of these 3 different soil types. There's that same climatic data for the Upper Loire. You can see where they're located, again, on the border between the Massif Central and the Paris Basin. Again, very similar to Pennsylvania, except that rainfall. And you can see also the elevation has gone up substantially, almost a little over 1,000 feet. One of the more popular tourist locations to visit here is in the city of Bourges, the Bourges Cathedral, very, very elaborate cathedral to visit if you happen to be in the area. These are all the wine growing regions of the Central Loire. We'll talk about some of the famous wines. The signature grape in this part of the world is Sauvignon Blanc. Also a little bit of Pinot Noir as a red grape. but Sancerre and Sauvignon Blanc are pretty much synonymous with one another. The first wine I'll highlight is a Sancerre. Again, it's 100% Sauvignon Blanc. If it says Sancerre on the label, it is Sauvignon Blanc. It is made with a direct pressing of the grapes. They are allowed to ferment. They sit on their lees, the dead yeast, for 3 to 4 months. Not a tremendously long time, but also long enough to give it a little bit of mouthfeel. And again, it's grown on that chalky limestone, giving it a nice crisp acidity and a flintiness or a minerality, aromas and flavors. On the right-hand side, I show you some of the caves where this wine is being made and aged for this particular grower. Also gives you an idea as to how much Sauvignon Blanc is grown compared to Pinot Noir. Clearly a dominance of Sauvignon Blanc in the region. Another Sancerre, again, this one, Le Monde Domaine Martin Montdom is the producer, a Sancerre, 100% Sauvignon Blanc, Kimmeridgian limestone, indigenous yeast, tank fermented and aged, again, giving it a very acidic, a very nice tart finish, a nice wine to go with a goat cheese. The local goat cheese that is famous from the Sancerre area is this Croton de Chavignon. Goat cheese, if you want to literally translate that phrase, that basically is slang for goat dung. Doesn't sound real appetizing, but if you let the cheese age, as the lower picture shows, you can see perhaps why it carries that particular term. But again, a nice goat cheese, any kind of goat cheese might go good with a nice Sancerre. Here are some of the other wines coming out of the Upper Loire or the Sainte Loire Valley. Puy-Fumé is another area that is predominantly Sauvignon Blanc. This Puy-Fumé is again an example in the PLCB system. Stainless steel fermented. They use a gravity vinification system. A Sancerre Rosé would be a mixture of Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Noir. It was probably a co-ferment. And a Sancerre Rouge is your Pinot Noir. So if you see a Sancerre Rouge, it's going to be a nice Pinot Noir. I think an interesting tasting would be like maybe a Burgundy Pinot Noir with a Sancerre Rouge, recognizing the difference in the climates and the regions. It might be an interesting comparison between the two. Getting here closer to the end, this is all the different foods that I think are signatures to the Loire Valley region. Of course, all kinds of cheeses. One of the upper left-hand corner, Loire Valley cheese, a Cour Nantais, of course, would be coming from the Nantais region. Oysters, I've already mentioned as that coming from the popular in that area, as well as the French flaky salt known as fleur de sel would be coming from the coastline in the Pays Nantais. Charcuterie becomes popular in this region, as there's mussels. The goat cheeses, as I mentioned, andouille or andouille sausage becomes popular. The troglodyte gardens, the caves, are famous for their French mushrooms. Rillettes, which is basically a pâté, is famous in the Tours area. And the black chickens with the black skin, the Jolene de Touraine, also popular dishes in this part of the world. So if you're looking for a French dinner and some, excuse me, I missed the Beurre Blanc, I already talked about that. But if you're looking for some nice French pairings to go with these different wines, there's plenty of examples there of foods that would go along with the wines of the Loire Valley. That wraps up our tour of the Loire Valley. Merci beaucoup, santé to all of you. Cheers. And lastly, here are my different references for today's presentation. Hope you certainly enjoyed the presentation this afternoon. And with that, Marty, I'll turn the floor back over to you.
Well, thank you, Kevin. That was fabulous, and now I'm really hungry as well. today, if for those of you, and I know there are a lot of people out there that are not from are not members of the Pennsylvania Wine Society, if you're interested, please go to our PA Wine Society website and check out some things, including the fact that we have all of these events that we've done over the last 2 years recorded and posted, and that's of course a perk of membership. We have a comment here, a couple comments. Well done, Kevin, and I certainly agree. So if you could take down the slides now, Kevin, and we can have our open chat. Let everybody open up their mics if they have any questions at all for Kevin. This is your chance to ask. And Sheila Randall says very, very informative. Kim, as always, an excellent presentation. My grateful thanks to you both, Kevin and Marty. Great job. Love the history tie-in. I have to tell everybody that today we've had people from as far away as Vancouver and Texas and Virginia, Connecticut, and probably a few other places I'm missing. So we cast a large network out there of, and there's something to be said for cold weather, because boy, we had 31 connections, which translates into how many people per connection. So we did well today in spite of football playoffs.
Speaking of which,
Yes.
Kevin, great job. I mean, this was really on the spot. I did want to make one comment though. The Court de Chambre you had pointed out is Grand Cru, and right now, if anyone in Pennsylvania can locate any of that, it's reduced. That stuff is ageable, and if you like sweet wines, it's one of the best sweet wines in the world. I mean, if you know Sauternes, that Court de Chambre is like off the charts, and is just great. I mean, it's the only thing they do there is make sweet Chenin Blanc. So, and anyway, just keep that in mind, guys, because it's a really good price and it's not going to go bad if you can find it out there. So
Thank you.
I also wanted to mention, I wanted to say my appreciation to, I think, a couple of people in the chat who corrected my rather poor pronunciation of French in some cases. Again, I do the best I can, maybe not perfect, but again, for sometimes, you just got to learn, and that's the only way to learn, is to just brute force your way through it all.
Kevin,
Yes,
just
sir.
real quick, if I can go out and get me some quarts of Chaume, you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I get to what you're saying, because it's like really sometimes hard to get that pronunciation correct. But yeah, I can get me a quart of Chaume. But
I think my pronunciation would get better with several more glasses of wine. It would probably
Yeah.
improve tremendously.
Absolutely.
Loosen up the tongue a little bit. Yeah.
Irene, I see you there. Do you have any comments?
Oh, wait. Yeah, I do have two things to add. Thank you for a great presentation. And Ken, when you were on your introduction, you went and mentioned Eleanor of Aquitaine, and that it would be a great movie. And I guess I'm aging myself, and maybe your older people will remember Katharine Hepburn played her in a great movie called The Lion of Winter. So if you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend you see it.
Absolutely. Eleanor's
Am I
story
great?
is fascinating by all
Yeah,
senses.
and yeah, and one other thing, I had I'm drinking a Cabernet Franc Rosé from d'Anjou, and it's very dry and very nice. So yeah, thumbs up on that one. So thank
Absolutely.
you.
Excellent. Yes, at least in my studies of wine, what I enjoy tremendously, to me, wine is geography, history, culture. There's so much more than just the wine itself. And some of these stories and history ties to me are just fascinating. So I hope you enjoy them as much as I do. If nothing else, I pique your curiosity to make you want to go visit this beautiful part of the world. I know I have it on my bucket list to go up to the Loire Valley. COVID has put the kibosh on a lot of travels, but this is certainly one part of the world that I think is well worth spending some time in. It's only about an hour and a half to 2 hours drive from Paris. And I have known people to drive from Paris to the area and spend time in some of those chateaus I mentioned. So clearly, I think that's an interesting place to put on your bucket list for travel.
Terrific. And I should mention that Irene is from Georgia, so there's another state that I didn't mention. So anybody else with comments?
Well, I probably have something else to say here, Marty.
Okay, Joe.
You know how this works. Just real quick. I mean, again, I love Loire Valley, and I think the presentation, what you did here is great. Just one more highlight. I mean, what I love about Loire is the diversity, because when you can go from Muscadet and Melon Blanc and then Chenin Blanc in the central and then Sauvignon Blanc out there, it's very diverse, and it's real easy to put together a neat little tasting with these wines. And usually you'll find somebody that'll like something in that mix. I just thought I'd add that because, again, I just have a real passion for French wine, and then specifically Loire Valley. Even if you can't get to visit there, get out there and try and buy some of these wines. Try them, put them in your glass, because it's good stuff. As long as they're not too old, again, it's all relative to what you can find out there. So,
by the way, Linda Wilcox comments that first of all, she says, great job. And then she said, I'm going to the Loire Valley in April and can hardly wait. So that's terrific. I wish that maybe we ought to do a group adventure and go there.
Joe, I know. Linda, I hope it gave you some travel ideas and some places to visit.
Oh yeah, and food and wine to look for. Yeah,
absolutely. Things to look forward to. Yeah.
All right. Anybody else with comments? I know Avril's been there. And who else? Gary, you have any comments today? He's thinking. All right.
I'm just trying to find my mute button. I took Joe's choice here and had the quartz to show. Yummy. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Kevin.
All right. Anyone else? Kathy Morgans, you have any comments? I caught her by surprise when I said that.
Hi, Marty. No, but thank you. It was a great tasting. Thank you.
How about our Virginia connection? No?
We're missing out on New Mexico today, Marty. What's going on?
We are. All four of them stood us up. I texted and Laura said they're just too busy. I mean, how can you be too busy?
Go Pittsburgh.
Yeah, well, Pittsburgh doesn't play till 8 o'clock tonight.
Yeah,
that's 6 o'clock tonight their time.
But Laura's a Packer fan.
Oh, that's right. But
yeah.
Debbie's a Steeler fan. So, Sheila, you have anything for us?
It was an excellent presentation. Really enjoyed it. Now, I hadn't had the Loire Valley on my bucket list, but I think maybe it's on there now. Thank you.
Sure. Because there's plenty to see and do. Just the wines alone would be worth the visit.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have a comment here from Christine, says, stay warm and safe, everyone. Susan out in Vancouver says, thanks. Greetings from Vancouver. Au revoir. So she's leaving us. So there she's waving to us. Susan, come back and visit us again. All right. Well, if there's no more comments, we'll leave Kevin go and do whatever he's going to do. I know he's going to watch the Steeler game tonight. And For the rest of you, thanks for attending. This has been great. And I look forward to seeing you all next month. We're going to be doing a presentation with Cordier, who will be presenting some of their wares. They are a distributor. So, check out our website and our newsletter for more details as that comes up. It'll be in about 4 weeks. And until then, I'll see you all on Wine Wednesday. Take care.
Thanks,
See
all.
you guys. See ya.
Good night.